You are listening to The Moon and to the Sun, Chapter 2, Percy's Secret. George woke up cramped in the corner of his bed with a pile of robes, jackets, and even a few cauldrons strewn over it. He remembered crashing on the bed without much care about its state at the time. It really wasn't much worse than before. The minute he moved, however, he felt someone's wand poking in his back. He soon realized it was his own. He could hear shouting in the kitchen. He wasn't quite ready to face anyone, yet when he began to remember the night before and his strange encounter with Luna Lovegood, his curiosity got the better of him. He couldn't be sure it really happened, that she was really there. She didn't look like the girl he remembered. This insight into his mental state concerned him enough to get up and face the shouting of the group he'd rather avoid. When he walked into the kitchen, the first thing he observed was Percy running around with a bucket shouting, "Stop it, you oaf," and "You're such a child." It was clear to George that he was directing this at their brother Ron, who was laughing as he held his wand aloft, directing a teapot to pour tea into everyone's cup. Surprisingly, everyone else was enjoying it too, except Percy. "Ron, that's really impressive. You've almost got it in the cup that time," Hermione said, much to Percy's chagrin. It was clear that almost wasn't nearly enough, as Percy ran around trying to catch the bits that weren't getting into the cup. "Ron, you are a child. Can you stop bothering Percy?" George spoke, and everyone turned. They looked at him in shock and silence, even Percy. After a moment's time, Ron replied, "Oh, it's just a bit of fun, George, just trying to be helpful." "Right. And have you ever been, Ron? Sure doesn't seem helpful to our brother." And with that, George used his wand to siphon the drips in and around the table where Percy failed to capture the tea. Ron's mouth snapped shut. Everyone else around the table, except maybe Ginny, looked ashamed. Ginny just looked at George as if trying to figure him out. The one annoying benefit to being the bereaved twin is that people were less likely to talk back to you. He missed Ron's ability to offer a comeback almost as much as he missed Fred's ability for a nice retaliatory joke. Percy, on the other hand, looked defeated. He took the bucket, set it down, and magicked the tea away. He seemed embarrassed and put out. Once he was done, he said, "I think I'll go out to get some more supplies. Be back in a bit." "Ron, maybe you should go apologize," Ginny said. Hermione looked a bit put out, knowing it was just the thing she was about to suggest. "Why should I? I mean, that's how Mum pours tea every day. I've been practicing." "You know Percy, Ron. He likes things a certain way," Hermione said. "I mean, you're getting loads better," she added, after a look from Ron that revealed one of hurt and betrayal. All the while, Harry's eyes were on George. When George noticed, he tried to look away and began busying himself with something for breakfast. Opening the icebox, he gazed inside to observe it emptied of its contents. "Where is everything? Isn't there any food left?" "Oh, well, most things were gone pretty early into the party," Ginny explained, and added, "Sorry." George was starting to feel like waking up was a mistake. Life was easier under the covers of his mother's quilt, the one she made for George and Fred when they were babies. "Well, isn't that great?" he said between gritted teeth. "How about I go and get us something? I could get something from the leaky cauldron." "Bring it back here?" Harry stood up, and Ginny started to as well, but he put his hand on her shoulder. "Want to come with, George? Fresh air might be good about now." George looked at the rest of the group, and it made the decision easier. Less bother with one than the rest, even if it was a calculated move by Harry. Sure, why not? They left and said nothing to each other all the way to the leaky cauldron. There wasn't many people about, but then again, many people were probably suffering still from a previous night's bender. Before they entered the cauldron, George stopped Harry. "All right, mate. Have at it." "What?" "I really thought you'd like an escape is all. Not going to press anything. I mean, I know what it's like, right?" George considered this. But again, he was curious about one thing. He pulled out the vial in his pocket and held it up to the light before Harry. "Where did you get that?" Harry said, looking curiously at the object. "You know what it is?" George asked. "I mean, I think so. Looks like a preserved tear." That's what comes to mind anyway. Not as clear as water. Got it in one. I'm impressed. George pocketed it again. Yeah, but whose is it? George didn't know what the memory of the vial represented to Harry. Only Ron and Hermione knew. He could see that Harry blanched a little at its sight. That's when George answered. Mine. But I got it from someone that I'm not sure was really there. George motioned to a bench in front of the leaky cauldron where he and Harry sat. He began to tell his story. Last night I popped up to the rooftop to avoid the crowd below. I'm sure Ginny will be disappointed, but I couldn't. I just wasn't in the right place, you see. George stared out at the street, watching a little girl with a dragon balloon and ice cream walk past. He saw the balloon begin to drift away before the little girl realized what happened. He quickly pulled out his wand and attempted to float the balloon back towards her, just into her reach. When she realized this, she turned and saw him. She smiled and went back towards her mother, telling her excitedly what happened. Harry waited for him to continue. Where was I? Oh, right. Anyway, as I was up there, a girl claiming to be Luna Lovegood showed up. It kind of looked like her, but less loony, or Luna-y. You know what I mean. She had short hair and her eyes seemed a bit less. Yeah, she was there early on, but she disappeared not long after she arrived. And the girl you're describing sounds like her? I talked with her about her father. Things aren't exactly getting on between them right now. This comforted George, Harry's confidence in Luna's reality. Right, well, great. I'm not as crazy as I thought. A little barmy, but in the normal way. Oh, you're completely sane, George. Harry paused. And the vial? How does that part fit into the rest? George didn't really want to answer. Now that he knew Luna was really there, then explaining how he came to have the vial was much more embarrassing. He shouldn't be embarrassed, but he'd spent many days trying not to feel, and the vial was proof it wasn't working. It's okay, George. If you'd rather not, then all right. Let's get some food. George stopped Harry. Well, that's the strange bit. She said when she handed it to me, so you never forget right now. I've been wondering about it all night. Oh, Harry said. Luna is enigmatic as ever. I think she meant to give you the memory of whatever you were thinking in that moment that caused the tear captured in the vial. Sorry, I know this is a bit personal. Harry and George sat and looked out at the sparse crowd. Both felt like there was nothing more to say, and both were far away in their thoughts. After some moments, George finally said, You know Ron isn't going to last much longer unless we get some food. I don't want him to start a fire in our kitchen when he gets desperate. Harry agreed, and they procured some food from the cauldron and returned home. When they entered the kitchen, Percy was back, and there was a full-fledged breakfast laid on the table. The worries about Ron were of no concern, as his mouth was full of scone and some clotted cream. He tried to speak, but all that came out was "Washishishusuflalahung." Ignoring Ron, You did all this, Perce? George was impressed with how easily Percy took charge of a desperate situation. He even seemed happy to have control of responsibility back into place. Of course. This lot, he said, while pointing to the group, and their friends ate us out of everything. I said I was sorry, Ginny said. I'll have Mum pay you back for our share. I didn't realize that no one ate before they came. Hermione pitched in. Well, I guess when you add beginning of term party to the invite, everyone's got a feast in mind. Ginny didn't say anything, but she glared at Hermione. She was probably contemplating if it was worth hexing her friend or keep the peace. She chose peace in the end. Thank you, Percy, Harry added, and sat down to partake. George looked at the group but didn't see where he fit. Percy was running about the room, keeping busy, but there wasn't an extra chair about for George to sit down. He set the items from the leaky cauldron on the table. He was starting to get a headache. He hadn't been out of the flat in weeks. It was all taking a toll on him. I think I'm going to lay down for a bit. George didn't wait for their response. He turned and left them all to stare after him. He fell back into the assortment of robes on his bed and closed his eyes. A moment later, a small tap on the door. "Ginny, not now, okay?" "Hey, it's me, Percy." George sat up. "What's up, Perce?" He wanted to be annoyed, but he was feeling bad for Percy after this morning. Percy could be annoying, but he had to admit that lately Percy was the only one who seemed to make him feel a bit better, like he wasn't completely alone. "I thought you'd like something to eat. You don't have to eat it now. I'll just put it over here." Percy set down a plate on a small table and began to leave the room. "Percy, wait." Percy turned and waited with a look of concern, like he was afraid George might say some joke at his expense. That was, after all, their way. Instead, what George said was, "Thank you." "Oh, yeah, of course. And Perce, can I ask you something?" Percy had his hand on the doorknob, but he was turned toward George. "What is it, George?" "What do you do now? I mean, since you lost your job at the ministry." Percy's face went whiter than usual. He stammered a bit before saying, "Well, I help you out here, I guess." George considered this. "Do I pay well?" He smiled to let Percy in on the joke. "Very funny, but actually, George, your business almost closed, and well, we didn't know what to do. Mom asked if I would step in and help run it and look after you. She was worried, you see. You haven't as much as said 5 words to anyone in the last months." "Do I still have a business then?" George was starting to have an uncomfortable feeling of panic. He thought about the joke shop he and Fred dreamed up. The thought that he could have lost this last tangible connection to Fred caused him to break out in a cold sweat. "Do I?" "Yes, George. Yes. I wouldn't let anything happen to it. And, well, you both were a bit loose with your spending habits, but I've made a few improvements. It's actually rather successful after everything." Percy looked at George with concern, tensing for the moment George might yell at him for interference. He continued once that didn't come. "Anyway, I haven't changed anything except how you track and manage your finances. Sometimes Ron helps out or Dad if needed." George stared at his brother. He was relieved. There was no one who could give him a confidence that this was true other than Percy. Percy's best fault was his factual nature. All he could say in return was, "Brilliant." Thank you for watching and listening. Stay tuned for the next chapter in To the Moon and to the Sun, a Harry Potter fan fiction. They release each week on Wattpad, and you can find the story there, links below. Thank you.